Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've got a really interesting gentleman to introduce you tonight. Jerrod Edson is his name. He's an author of several novels, most recently a novel called The Boulevard, published by Galilean Press, and it's being hailed as an absorbing and unforgettable testament to the undeniable power of art in our daily lives. Jerrod Edson, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I understand you've written numerous different books.
Yeah, this is my sixth novel. First one of speculative fiction, so it's a little different for me.
What is speculative fiction?
You know what? I had a conversation with another spec fiction author, and where we did an interview together. We don't really know. It's somewhere between literary fiction and your sci-fi fantasy novels. It's kind of a little bit surreal, out of the ordinary kind of thing. So it's that gray area between those two.
Fantastic. And tell me, what was the inspiration for this book?
I was actually, I had the idea about 20 years ago. I was working at Chapters in university, and it was during the Indigo takeover. And Heather Reisman was coming into our store, and the manager of our store was kind of running around like a chicken with his head cut off, trying to make the store look perfect. During that time, I was working in the fiction section, and I was flipping through one of those Far Side calendars. You know, the Far Side, the cartoon. Flipping through one of those desk calendars, and I saw there was one cartoon with a door, and Satan was on one side of the door, and a repairman was on the other. And on the door it said 999. And I'm paraphrasing, but the repairman says something like, "I must have gotten this upside down," like looking at his work order. And what was going on at our store at the time, I just had literally had this light bulb moment. I thought, what if God visits hell and Satan is in a bind to get hell looking perfect again? So I wrote some notes down on that, and over the past 20 years, I sat down to write it in 2014 when I was ready to write it, and wrote it all out, and it's been just got published. So it's been a long journey, but it wasn't something I was focused on forever. I published 5 novels in between that.
Are most novels a long journey?
Not really. They are now because they're getting a lot longer. My first few novels were quite short, maybe 150 pages or so, but now they're reaching, the my manuscripts are about 500 pages now. So it's a long slog to get through the first draft, about 8 months. Wake up every morning at 4:30, 5 o'clock to get a couple hours in before work. And once that first draft is down, then the easy part comes. It's setting it down for a period of months and coming back and rewriting and fixing and all those things.
You write at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning every day.
Yeah, I'm well when I'm working on a new novel. So the one I'm just finishing now, I'm on the fourth draft. So I haven't sat down to write a new one in about a year. I usually take a year off between because it's just so mentally draining on me. So I'm gearing up mentally to start a new one in the fall at some point.
And this, I understand, is a testament to the undeniable power of art in our daily lives. I'm looking at your wall behind you, and there's a lot of very inspirational, interesting art.
Yeah, I'm from the East Coast, so I like a lot of East Coast artists. I'm from St. John, New Brunswick, and there's a few East Coast artists on my walls, and luckily they're still affordable, so looks good.
What is the undeniable power of art?
Um, well, for me, art is a feeling. I'm talking about visual arts. In university at Carleton, the National Gallery used to be free, and I used to go minimum once a week, and just go in there and sit. And it's almost like it was almost like a drug for me. It was something I was feeling anxious if I didn't get it. So it gives me a feeling. It makes me happy. I think art makes people happy. For me, it's more. Um, a tonic, if that makes any sense.
A tonic.
Yeah, just kind of settles my brain if I can go and see the right things. And I was in Ottawa a few weeks ago visiting family, and I have to go to the gallery and go to certain paintings, and it just kind of settles me.
I interviewed a child psychologist from London, England once who made this quote about art for mental health patients and said, when your voice fails you, art speaks for you.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing. It's you just I don't know why I like some paintings that I like. I remember being at an exhibit. It was an impressionist exhibit a few years ago at the AGO, and there was someone standing beside me, a couple standing beside me, and they were very intuitive and knew a lot more about art than I did, and they were dissecting it and breaking it apart. but I just couldn't help but listen to the conversation and realize there was no real feeling there, right? They were dissecting it. For me, I just, sometimes a piece of art can stop me. I was in Paris in 2017 at the Musée d'Orsay, and a couple paintings stopped me in my tracks and just had to sit there. So it's more a feeling than breaking it apart, I think.
I understand that your book has an interesting dedication. Can you tell me what it is and why you chose to share it?
Yeah, my father passed away in 2020, and he always read all my stuff before it was published. And this one I dedicated to him. He read an early version of it, and my dad was a man of few words. But I said after he got finished reading it, I said, "Dad, what do you think?" And he said, "It's different." And that's all he said about it. So my talk with Jason Haru, the other author, a few weeks back about speculative fiction, we summed up that that's what spec fiction is. It's just different.
It's different. Well, that's
Yeah.
great. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes with Jerrod talking about his book, about writing, and about his inspiration. Stay with us, everyone. Back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Jerrod Edson. He is an author of several novels. He hails from Streetsville, just north of where I am in Mississauga. And he has published a new novel recently called The Boulevard by Galleon Press. And as I mentioned earlier, it's been hailed as an absorbing and unforgettable testament to the undeniable power of art in our daily lives. He says it's spec fiction, which I've never heard of before, but he describes it the way his father described it, as being different, which is different. And so I'm looking forward to reading the book, sir. I understand that you, in addition to having this book available, online at Amazon or in Indigo and places like that, you've got a blog post. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, at jerrodedson.blogspot.com. I just post different things, works in progress, and things like that. In this novel, I mentioned several works of art. So I've actually made a post where I'm listing all of the works of art, so you can go in and look and see them visually as you're reading, in order that they appear in the novel.
And I understand you refer to Van Gogh, and you use him to illuminate and bring light to the underworld. What's that all about?
Yeah, well, that's where the speculative fiction comes in. It's kind of out there. I knew this was a big novel when I had the idea for it, and that's why it took me so long to write. Essentially, I had to figure out first of all what's the difference between heaven and hell, and I thought it's light and darkness. And when Satan was cast into hell, he did it because, I mean, according to Milton, he loved it. He wanted to take over heaven. So once he got to hell, I figured he wouldn't be settled upon, the darkness and the filth and pits of lava, etc. So he had to find a way to illuminate, to kind of to bring heaven's light to hell. So over the centuries of research, he realized that finding artists to illuminate could work best. So he spent centuries looking for artists until he finally settled on. He stumbled through a few of them until he settled on Van Gogh. So in the novel, there's this called the Boulevard, this 60-block route from the gates to his tower, and it's now painted with all the buildings are covered in murals painted by Vincent van Gogh. So the bulk of the book is the last 3 years of Van Gogh's life, where Satan is retelling to Ernest Hemingway, of all people, how he got Van Gogh to commit suicide. Because as he says, even there are rules even I must follow. He needed him to commit suicide, so he got to hell, and then he would commission him to do it. So it's out there.
So you're saying that both Van Gogh and Hemingway are in hell?
Yeah, there. Well, I went by on the premise of if you commit suicide, you're going to hell. So that's how I got them there. There's another author, Jean Reese, who's one of my favorite writers. She got there, and that was a clerical error, which Satan says those things happen.
I understand that the citizens of hell are not happy to learn that Satan plans to destroy the Boulevard. What's going on there?
Well, it's their only light. Hemingway remarks that once he got there, he didn't know how he would be able to function in hell until he went to the Boulevard. It's almost like it is for me. It's a source of some happiness. for the citizens of Elk. And so my hell is very different than what people might imagine. It's just basically a gloomy place with cities all over, and the main city, capital city, is the focus of the novel.
And this boulevard has murals all along it. And so why would the citizens of hell want to lose those murals? Because that's the light, that's the inspiration.
That's just it. They don't want to lose it. It's their only source of some happiness with their predicament.
Okay, so I got to ask you: is there a connection to the real world there, where we have cuts and arts funding and stuff like that? Do people object to losing our own boulevards, our own streets of art?
I like to hope that people object to that. I always hate to see cuts to arts. I'm a teacher. I'm in education, so like we're really seeing the definitive cuts in my day to day. But cutting it in the art world too. I mean, imagine I'm going to go to the extreme. Imagine if you had no music in the world. What would that be like? So for me, it's cutting like art programs and things like that are it just takes away from everything, if that makes any sense. I know I'm oversimplifying it, but
What should be done in our community to solve that?
well, you've got to get to the grassroots. I would personally like where I'm at in Streetsville. I would love to see a reading series pop up in Streetsville at a pub once a month. That would be a lot of fun. I know there you can look. Toronto has plenty of reading series. They have a tree reading series in Ottawa. Sheridan College is doing one. But I'd like to see something like there's one in Toronto called Draft, and writers show up and they read their works in progress. I think that's a lot of fun. I'd like to see something consistent that people know about. That if you Google Mississauga reading series, something definitive pops up, and you can go and check it out. Or if you're a writer, you can go read your work there. So I'd like to. I mean, it's easier said than done, obviously, but that would be my wish list.
And do people come to provide input, to criticize, or just listen?
Both. I would love to have like the one thing with some readings is when there aren't any Q&As. I love to if I do a reading, I love it when people ask questions. So I'd like it to be. I'd like to have a reading series that's a little bit more informal, where the writer reads and people can ask questions. That's a lot of fun.
I went to TIFF, and the movie was excellent. But what was really enjoyable was listening to some of the questions and more importantly the answers after the movie was filmed. So I agree with you. I think that's a wonderful idea. I used to be president of the Mississauga Arts Council. You should reach out to the Arts Council and make that recommendation, and I think that they would be motivated to implement it.
I will do that, certainly. Yeah. I,
Have
I
you?
was at TIFF not quite a few years ago. Everything is so skewed with COVID, but pre-COVID and post-COVID. Maybe 6 or 7 years ago now. I was at a documentary with Martin Scorsese, and it was the opening for that, and he was there, and they did a Q&A with him. And it was amazing to hear somebody talk about a legendary director speaking about his films. And it was about the New York Times Book Review, the 50th anniversary. That was a documentary. And one of the questions they asked Scorsese was, "Do you prefer making films or do you prefer making documentaries?" And his answer was really cool. He said, "It's all the same to me. It's just the next project I'm doing." So with this novel being spec fiction, something I'm not used to doing, I don't see it as speculative fiction. I never thought of it as that until it came out, and people said, "Oh, speculative fiction, speculative fiction." I was like, "Well, it's just another novel for me."
That's interesting. So is there some benefit to using speculative fiction as a way of addressing social issues? What's your advice to people in that regard?
Well, the nice thing about speculative fiction is there are no boundaries. Like you go beyond reality, so you can kind of do anything you want. So you've got a lot more roadway to and different ways of saying what you want to say. On the other end of that, my publicist is having harder times um, getting reviewers for speculative fiction because people automatically think it's sci-fi fantasy if they don't want to read that. But so I think it's more literary fiction than anything. But there is a bit of weight to it where it's hard to put it out there.
Do you have the book handy? Would you read something from it for us?
Sure. Wow. Let's see.
So, Jerrod Edson, would you read something from the book for us, please?
Sure. This is at the earlier stages of the novel. Most of the novel takes place on a train where Satan is recalling Van Gogh's life and how he got him into hell. So this is um, the intro to Ernest Hemingway. Satan's private car on the train was a scaled down version of his office. Flamboyant rugs, a sitting area with two wingback chairs, and a fireplace with bookshelves on either side. A dining table and two small chairs lined the windows. The walls and ceiling were of a floral design in black velvet. Near the entrance, the hall was narrow, making way for Satan's sleeping quarters, which consisted of a large bed with black satin sheets, a nightstand, and a gold trimmed armoire. Satan facing the fire, his mind swirling as the train pulled out of the station, the engines heaving slowly and steadily forward against the weight of the cars. He could see out the window the glow from the boulevard outlining the tops of the buildings, and it deflated him, so that his only comfort was to sink a little lower in his chair and stare into the fire. He knew Mr. Graves was right, that it was an unimaginable thing he was doing, that the boulevard really was a miracle, how its light shone over the entire city in such a way that it felt as though hell, in all its gloom, had somehow acquired a tiny piece of the sun. It also bothered him what Graves had said about being afraid. It didn't bother him because Graves had said it, but because he knew, stubbornly against himself, that Graves was right about that too. Mr. Gregory entered the car. Pardon me, sir. I've just been informed that Mr. Ernest Hemingway and Miss Jean Reese are on this train. Satan perked up. Hemingway? Send for him, but not Miss Reese. Ernest Hemingway was big and burly, with wide shoulders and a broad chest, and he lumbered across the car, not laboriously like Mr. Graves, but flat-footed, each step a pigeon-toed thump. He sat in the other chair facing the fire, his frame snug between the armrests. He wore a plaid wool shirt unbuttoned at the top, the girth of his chest stretching the buttonholes. A worn leather wineskin was slung over his shoulder, and he removed it and placed it at his feet.
So, hell in your book isn't just this place with, as you said, burning lava. It's actually a city where people have black satin sheets on rail cars and can have conversations with Ernest Hemingway. Doesn't sound so bad.
It's not that bad. It's a barren landscape, and I get into the novel how it was built. So you've got various cities throughout hell, and this is the main one where Satan lives, capital city. So of course he's got his own train. Got his own car on the train, as he would. He's kind of. I wrote him. I said in an earlier interview that he's kind of a snooty CEO type. So I don't have this scary version of Satan that you might see in the movies. He's
a snooty CEO.
He's like a snooty CEO. So as soon as I introduced him,
so we can call snooty CEO Satan.
Yeah, well, there's not much difference, right? As soon as I introduced him as Satan, I could make him whatever I wanted. So I wrote him as a snooty CEO with feelings and emotions and guilt and everything else. And the reader knows he's Satan, so that is automatically layered into it. It was easy to write.
I didn't ever think there'd be light in hell, and you're saying that this was a little bit of the sun in hell. So is Satan somehow trying to improve hell? Is
Absolutely.
he a CEO that is working to actually make improvements?
Yeah, well, there's a deeper story to it than that. But it's all about trying to get heaven's light into hell for Satan and for everyone else. He's a very selfish character, so he does it for himself. But again, that's what art does. It illuminates. Yeah.
If hell isn't as bad in your mind as I thought, or as other people have described it, it's just a gloomy city with a snooty CEO running the place. What's heaven like? Or is that the next
book? Well, I do describe heaven a little bit early on in the novel. I don't want to say that hell's not a bad place, or actually, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't believe in any of it. It's all fiction to me. So it was easy to write. It was just my version of it, in the same way that the Hemingway, I could have written a few versions of him, and I made a caricature of Ernest Hemingway. I'm a Hemingway nerd, so I did very little research on him. I just picked my version I want. He's there kind of as comedic relief in the book. Heaven is kind of what people might expect, right? Very white, everything's illuminated. But at the same time, I didn't go into explicit detail. I leave it to the reader's imagination. There's not very many scenes that take place in heaven. But part of the reason why Satan was expelled was because he snuck in a flower from Eden, and it bloomed like wildfire, right? And because God, it wasn't his idea. He banished him for it. So I totally turned around Milton's story of the rebellion and the causes for it and why he was banished. I had fun with it. Took a lot of liberties, of course. But again, that's what spec fiction is.
You said you were a teacher. What do you teach?
Right now, they've got me teaching phys ed from kindergarten to grade 5. So that is a form of hell in itself. It makes for interesting days.
Do your students know that you're an author?
They do, yeah. Every once in a while, the teachers say something. They all come when I pick them up at the class. Say, you're a published author. You're a published author." And I say, "Yes, but don't read it yet. I've got 2 girls, and they're not allowed to read my stuff yet until they get a little bit older."
Why?
Just some of the content, the some of the language. There's people drinking my St. John novels. There's people drinking and things like that. So I told my kids they better wait till high school before they read it.
And
The other thing,
have any
sorry,
of your
yeah,
former students read it and come back and chatted with you about it?
no, interestingly enough, no, none of them have yet. So maybe I should be an English teacher and encourage them a little more.
Do you think people should write? Would you encourage people to give their hand a chance, a try at a novel?
Yeah, yeah. I was with Oberon Press for 3 novels, and that was a staple in Canadian literature. And they went for 55 years and published a lot of fantastic writers like Michael Ondaatje and David Adams Richards. And my editor there, Dilshed Engineer, she said to me once, she said, "You write for you. You don't write for anybody else. Um, Anything else is a bonus, including being published." So when you're starting out as a writer, you're like, "Oh, I want this to turn into a book. Like make this a book, make this a book." But the fulfillment you get from just finishing a story, finishing a novel that may never be published, yeah, I would certainly encourage that. It's quite a fun thing and a great feeling when it's done.
That's interesting. I've never heard that before, but it really is really quite inspirational. You write for you.
Yeah, and nobody else. Anything she said, anything else is a bonus, including being published. Now, I'm lucky enough that I've worked hard for the last 20 years, so everything I write now, I expect to get published. But it took a lot of years learning how to do it before I got to that point. But I find a lot of people who are writing are so worried about being published that they lose focus on the actual craft.
That's fascinating. And when you write, do you try to address social issues like it sounds like you did with this one in regards to the importance of art, or do you just write a story?
I just tend to write a story. I was asked earlier about this, who do you write for? And I said, I don't write for anybody. There's no audience I write for. I write for me. So it's just a matter of something. I just have an idea for a story that I want to tell. And if it's a good enough idea, I stick to it. It's as simple as that. It's kind of like if I'm not writing, I'm getting anxious. I'm not working on something new. Like I'm already feeling it that it's been since last year since I finished a first draft that I'm gearing up for another one because I'm getting that feeling inside that I got to do it. I got to do it. So um, it's a tricky thing. When I'm writing well, I feel really good. When I'm not writing at all, I go to the art gallery.
Really, that's fascinating. So creativity is something that is sort of burning inside of you and you got to get it out. That's really interesting. Let's take a break for some messages and come back, and we're going to chat a little bit more with Jerrod Edson, author of his new book called The Boulevard, about where creativity comes from, because this is interesting. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Jerrod Edson. He is an author in Streetsville, Mississauga, and he's the author of several novels. His most recent one is called The Boulevard, published by Galilean Press. And it sounds really interesting. It is using a a style of writing called speculative fiction, which I haven't really experienced before, and I'm looking forward to understanding it more and reading it. And he's describing a version of hell, and a boulevard in his hell that Satan has created with a whole bunch of murals of art, and it's bringing a little bit of light and sun into hell. Sounds really fascinating. And Van Gogh is the painter, and he ends up on a train meeting Ernest Hemingway to discuss stuff. Wow, it's pretty out there. Maybe your father was right. Interesting. Are all your books speculative fiction?
No, this is the first one, and my first five are literary fiction. They take place in St. John, New Brunswick, where I grew up. So I have a list of recurring characters, and it's kind of a world I've created there, which I'll certainly revisit at some time.
Really, that's interesting. And so recurring characters. So it's like a series, and doing different things all in St. John.
Yeah, a minor character in one novel, I might go to the next novel and say, "Oh wow, I could delve into this person's life a little more," and then it turns into a whole book on its own. So it's people have told me it's fun to to kind of see where people are in their lives, where they've been doing over the years.
And I presume you obviously use a lot of the location that you're aware of because of your coming from St. John, New Brunswick. Are any of the characters real, or do they have connection to real characters that you knew?
Yeah, I've used real characters. I've used one of my best friends. He owns a restaurant and pub in St. John, and his name's Sean Verner. I actually used him in a few different scenes, which he really enjoyed. I used a couple friends in a novel called The Goon. Just their names. They tend to like it. It. For me, it makes it more realistic to have my fictional characters mixing in with real people that I know. It makes just makes the world more real for me.
I've read an interesting book, or I'm reading an interesting book set in Nantucket by an author that has a whole series of books all set in Nantucket. I'm not sure if any of the characters are real, but I think that one of the things that makes it interesting is that there is this connection to real locations and a consistency between the books on the real locations. Do you think that's that versus speculative fiction sounds like the complete opposite?
Well, it can be. If you think of a book, I'm reading Shoeless Joe right now, which is the novelization of Field of Dreams, right? So if you think of the movie Field of Dreams, the baseball movie, the Kevin Costner, James Earl Jones, that's speculative fiction. It's based in the real world, but there's something a little bit surreal to it. So it's not necessarily otherworldly. It can be subtle. Things that happen in the real world. But yeah, this was a completely made up world for me. St. John is set, and I know it. And my characters walk around all over the city in different places, so I know it. I was asked a few years ago about do I take liberties with that with a real place, and I do. There were some restaurants that had been closed, but I wanted to have them in a scene in a book later on, so I put them in the scene. Um, yeah.
Yeah, you used the word surreal. That's a word that I hear people use a lot lately, and I'm not sure if everyone uses it correctly. Is surreal, you used otherworldly, worldly. Is that the correct definition of surreal?
I think surreal is just something that's a little bit off the beaten path of reality, right? Something that can happen, that if you're watching it, you really need. If you're watching it, for instance, like Field of Dreams, like the book I'm reading right now, hearing the voice in the field, "If you build it, he will come," right? That's not something that would happen in the real world. So it's a step away from it. It's not necessarily science fiction. You're not flying out to outer space or necessarily going to hell or another world. It could be in this world too.
You mentioned earlier that at times you get this novel that's in you that's got to come out. Where does creativity for you come from?
Well, I use the character of Hemingway in this novel to talk a lot about how I feel about creativity. And Hemingway says it's a curse in this book, and sometimes I feel it is a curse to have it. I know. I remember reading something years ago. The late author Paul Quarrington said he doesn't understand how people who don't write can. How do they even get up in the morning? Because it's every part of them. I see it as more. a bit of a curse because it's a lot of work to get a book done. It's all consuming. And sometimes I wish I didn't have that urge, that I could just go about my day and not have to do that. It would be, it'd feel pretty, I think it would feel pretty good. It was an addiction I started in high school and it just hasn't stopped for the past 30 years.
An addiction. That's a strange way to describe it.
Well, I have to do it. If I don't do it, I begin to get antsy. I can imagine. I don't want to compare it to someone who's addicted to a drug or something, but it does feel like that. If I'm away from it, I don't feel right until I can get my dose of it and get into working on a novel.
Now you say you get up at 4:35 to start writing every day before you go to work. Do you get the visions of or the ideas for what you're going to write that day while you're sleeping, or when you wake up, or in the shower, or do you think about it all day long when you're teaching gym? Like, where does it come from?
Well, when I'm working on a new novel, it's all I'm thinking of. It's always in the background. I've always got a piece of paper and a pencil on hand in my jacket or wherever because it's all I'm thinking of. Especially you get deep into a story. You can imagine a 500-page manuscript, how many little things that you can get wrong in terms of timeline or something. You don't have someone watching a Blue Jays game if it's December, right? Because baseball wouldn't be on it. But you might, as you're writing the story, you don't realize that until you're thinking of it. Oh my God, he's got to be watching a hockey game, not a baseball game. So even things like that. So it's all consuming when I'm in the middle of writing a novel. When I get finished, I put it down, and again, I'll go back to my editor at Oberon Press. She says that's the period of letting it percolate, right? It gets out of your system, and you come back fresh a year later, 8 months later, and you can look at it again, and you can find more mistakes or find things where you need to fix. But it's certainly all consuming when I'm in the middle of a book.
You put it down and come back to it 8 months or a year later. But you said earlier in our conversation that you were on the fourth draft. How long does it take to go from finished product in the first draft to true finished product?
Well, it really all depends on what one is drawing my attention at the time. I've got right now, I've got three that are all on their finishing stages. One's a novella, it's only 150 pages, and I've got one that's 400 pages and one that's 500 pages. So the one I'm working on now that's drawing to me is the one that's on the fourth draft. Um, I've got a Streetsville novel that's 400 pages, and I'll get back to that once that starts tugging at me. It's nice to have, like I said, if I'm not writing or writing well, I begin to feel anxious. But now that I've got three, in the cupboard, I feel pretty good about that. So even to start another one will feel even better.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this novel in Streetsville that's got a local connection?
Yeah, it starts with a scene. A lot of times I start my novels, the Boulevard was planned, but all my other books have started out with a scene. This is a scene where a woman picks up her father from the Institute in Bath, who's been in prison for 20 years. And I just went from there. And they live in Streetsville, and he's going to live in her basement and try to get his life back together. So it really goes back on what happened, why he went to prison, and I really trick the reader. I lead them in different directions, and the subplot really works well. So I'm really happy with it. It's on its final stages, but like I said, I'm focusing on something else right now. So I'll get to that one in a couple months.
If someone came to you and said they wanted to be a writer, and they wanted some suggestions on how to get started, what would you say?
Just do it. Just do it. I think a lot of people talk about maybe they like to just talk about writing, but they don't actually do it. I think that comes from Stephen King. He says, I just write and get it done. The biggest thing with a novel is anybody can start a novel. Very few finish one, right? So just do it. It doesn't matter if it's good or bad. Just sit down and write. There's no other thing you can do.
Do you write an outline? Do you know the ending when you start, or do you just start with chapter one?
I just start with chapter one. I start with a scene that I find interesting. I've got for instance, I've got one where it's at a funeral, and they show up, and the hole hasn't been dug. So that I went from there. It turned into a whole style. It's called A Place of Pretty Flowers. It was published in 2007, 2008. Forget now. That's bad. But I always start with a scene and if the scene works and I believe it, then I just kind of follow the characters where they go. But the Boulevard was a whole different beast because it wasn't something I could follow. I had to have a plan made out, and that's why it took so long to write.
Um, if people want to follow your work, if they want to check out some of your books, if they want to read your blog post, where did we go for all that information?
You can just Google my name. Lots of stuff comes up. I have all my reviews on my Blogspot post, Jerrod.Edson at blogspot.com. All my reviews of my previous books. There's a Wikipedia page, all that fun stuff. I'm in the New Brunswick Literary Encyclopedia, which is done by St. Thomas University, which gives a nice long biography on basically my life from when I was 17 till I think it ended 2011. So might have to update it.
Jerrod Edson, it's been a real pleasure meeting you. Thank you very much for sharing some of your book, Spec Fiction, which I hadn't heard of before, and I apologize. I wasn't knowledgeable about it, but thank you for sharing some of the story of the Boulevard and about Ernest Hemingway and Van Gogh and Satan, and reading for us, and then talking a little bit about creativity and inspiring us all to give it a shot. Thank you for that.
Thank you for having me, Brian. It's been a lot of fun.
And I encourage you to reach out to the Mississauga Arts Council. It's a great organization. And submit your novel for a Marty Award, which is the annual awards. And I love your idea of a reading opportunity at different pubs. I think that we've got these opportunities for musicians to go and do sessions where amateur musicians get to come up, or professional musicians in a jam kind of session. Certainly, we have a lot of art shows for fine arts. We've got dance opportunities, but you're right. I don't think we've had many opportunities that I know of for reading, and I think one of the other things that I've just heard about was poetry slam, and people came up and did poetry, and it was almost a competition where they would recite different poetry, and so I love the idea of having a reading series, and so I congratulate you for that idea, and I hope it works.
Yeah, it could be. We'll see where it goes.
And then I guess the last thing I'd like to say is I love this idea of creativity being sort of something inside of you that you got to get out. And I haven't had that described that way to me before, but that's inspirational. And I think a lot of us do have some little amount of creativity somewhere in us, and we don't give it that opportunity to come out, and we should give it that opportunity to come out. And so thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Jerrod Edson and his book, The Boulevard. I recommend it to you. What an interesting conversation. Thanks everyone for joining us. That's our show for tonight. Good night.